Test. Oh yeah, that looks like I'm good. Okay. I'm Phil Wyman, and this is the Wild Theology Podcast, where the world, the humans in it, and God are all wilder than we've been told.
That's your intro.
So, you'll get philosophy and theology and crazy stories that come from 30 years of pastoring,
Boring.
20 years of festival work,
Whatever.
and the mud and blood of wrestling with the living in the spaces angels fear to tread.
Trying to sound interesting, are we? Yeah, you think you got something to say?
Yes.
Yeah, that's the problem, dimwit.
Like I'm a lot smarter than you think.
Yeah, you tightened your shoes this morning.
Whatever. We're Phil Wyman, and this is Wild Theology, where you get to argue with your own ideas.
And lose.
That's the point. If you would like to support this podcast, you can do so by going to patreon.com/Phil Wyman. This episode of the Wild Theology Podcast is coming to you from Salem, Massachusetts. I've just returned from the UK, and so here I am back in Salem preparing for the month of outreach in October that we do every year. But I wanted to address something that came to light just in this last week. I was surprised to hear about. Well, I shouldn't say I was surprised. I was not completely surprised, but it came to light just in the last few days of my travel from the UK to the US. So this podcast will be centered around the allegations about Todd Bentley, but more importantly around the issues of the changing sexual morality within Christianity that I've been witnessing over the last 15, 20 years. So, shortly after returning from the UK, I found that in the last few days of my travel, this firestorm of allegations about sexual perversity and ongoing abuse of influence had been released about the popular evangelist, faith healer, Todd Bentley. Stephen Powell, a fellow evangelist who once considered Todd to be a mentor, released a written and video material on Facebook outlining a history of ongoing accusations against both Bentley and his wife Jessa. The accusations include heterosexual and homosexual behavior, swinging, multiple partner sexual engagement, and drug and alcohol abuse. There is apparently evidence that Todd Bentley has been asked not to return to churches in Pakistan and Mexico due to his behavior with ministry students in those countries. A 30-page paper with documentation was released to people in Christian leadership who have been directly connected with Todd Bentley in the past. Later, when there was no response, it was released to some Christian news networks. This paper has not been made public yet. Most notably, though, the leaders who did not respond included Rick Joyner of Morning Star Ministries and Bill Johnson of Bethel Church in Reading. These leaders were part of a small team that supposedly oversaw a restoration process that began after previous moral failures by Bentley back in 2008. Powell sent a letter to Rick Joyner months previous to this public release of information. After months of frustration at the lack of communication about what appears to be a critical issue of Christian leadership failure, Stephen Powell went public with a Facebook video on August 22nd. The purpose of this podcast is not to make specific points about Todd Bentley and his ministry or to pass some kind of judgment directly about the issue. Though, I should make my position known. I personally would never invite Todd Bentley to stand on a pulpit I had oversight of, and I am astounded by people who continue to support his ministry in the light of years of stories of indiscretion. I should make note that I believe that the Christian church today really is too broad and eclectic to be able to fully discipline a popular leader and have everyone who calls themselves a Christian agree. On one hand, this can be a strength when someone who is revolutionary seeks to change a troubled church for the better. Different denominations may be evidence of the fact that the Christian church is a self-correcting mechanism, and we have all of the Protestant church and groups like Methodism as evidence of this. But This wide variation of views is a weakness when large groups stick together with ungodly people as their leaders. Now, the real purpose of this podcast is to point out an ongoing sexual promiscuity that is being treated as unimportant in evangelical circles. For a number of years, I've been telling friends in ministry about the rising alternative sexual conduct happening in Christian circles. Things like polyamory and swinging are no longer uncommon in certain church circles. It's happening in neo-monastic communities, and you can even find open discussions of these lifestyle choices online. This is nothing new in Christianity. Paul references sexual immorality happening in the churches of the first century, and John refers to the wickedness of a leader referred to as Jezebel in the book of Revelation. Early church fathers warned against the fast-growing movement of the rise of immoral leaders. In the 19th century, the Oneida community, now famous for their silverware, was an obscure open sexuality Christian sect and commune. In the 1960s, the Children of God, also known as the Family, which still exists today in small communities around the world, practiced what they called flirty fishing and was known as a polyamorous Christian religious sect. The rise of this kind of sexual liberation, if liberation is the real word, is as strong as it has been at any point in Christian history. In the 80s, we saw the fall of Jimmy Swaggart and Jim Bakker, and in 2007, Ted Haggart made the headlines with his crack use and escapades with male prostitutes. The Todd Bentley story is simply another example of too many Christians willing to overlook gross immorality for the sake of following their favorite personality. Now, when I say this, I'm not automatically assuming that everything that is brought forward in these allegations is true, but it's the response of Christian leadership that I'll outline shortly that is the disheartening thing I see happening. This unfortunate behavior has shown its dark face in our voting patterns and in the loss of influence of evangelical Christianity in our world. We've become people who say one thing and openly practice and support another thing. Those of us who identify as evangelicals are having to rethink whether we can use the moniker any longer, because too many bad things are happening under the evangelical umbrella. We've lost respect in our world to an almost unretrievable degree. Perhaps nothing shows this more than Rick Joyner's response to the Todd Bentley accusations. In his response video to Stephen Powell's allegations and evidence, he called Powell's behavior, quote, the work of the devil, unquote, and accused him of being manipulative, practicing witchcraft, and working under what Joyner calls, quote, a Jezebel spirit, unquote. When we begin to consider correction and the self-regulation of the church to be a form of manipulation, I think we've lost our way. Perhaps Rick Joyner should reread the reference to Jezebel in the book of Revelation. Encouraging others towards sexual immorality seems to be the real issue in that text, and any gross immorality should be discouraged and spoken against. Here's what John says in the book of Revelation. Notwithstanding, I have a few things against thee, because thou sufferest that woman Jezebel, which calleth herself a prophetess, to teach and to seduce my servants to commit fornication, and to eat things sacrificed unto idols. I gave her space to repent of her fornication, and she repented not. Behold, I will cast her into a bed, and them that commit adultery with her into great tribulation, except they repent of their deeds. And I will kill her children with death, and all the churches shall know that I am he which searcheth the reins and hearts, and I will give unto every one of you according to their works. Let me reread that text in the Message version, something a little more up-to-date than the King James. Why do you let that Jezebel, who calls herself a prophet, mislead my dear servants into cross-denying, self-indulging religion, I gave her a chance to change her ways, but she has no intention of giving up a career in the God business. I'm about to lay her low, along with her partners as they play their sex and religion games. The bastard offspring of their idol whoring I'll kill. Then every church will know that appearances don't impress me. I x-ray every motive and make sure you get what's coming to you. Now, I'm not reading those passages saying that death is what sexual immorality deserves, but I am making a point that God seems to be pretty concerned with these kind of issues. Thank you to my patrons who help make these missional travels and these podcasts possible. Without you, I couldn't do it. God bless. If you'd like to support this project, you can do so here on Patreon for as little as $1 a release. And at the most, that's $4 a month.
Why on earth would anybody want to support us?
Well, I think we're pretty cool, and maybe some people believe in what we're doing.
Oh, come on, you believe that?
Yeah.
Don't you ever think they're just a little too weird for the average person?
Yeah, sometimes.